Okay,
Ready.
welcome everybody. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you, Edgar, for helping us out and being our guest in this Zoom session. We are gonna talk today about court interpreting exam, and thank you, Edgar.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, let me introduce myself. And thank you, Zinal, for inviting me. That's very gracious of you to have me here on your YouTube channel. My name is Edgar Hidalgo, and I am a certified court Spanish interpreter here in California. Now, what's so special about me? I have a bachelor's in translation interpretation from Long Beach University. So I studied to be an interpreter, from my degrees, and I have a master's in linguistics and Spanish. But I have experience in a lot of fields in court interpreting, in medical interpreting. I was a staff interpreter in a few hospitals, Long Beach Memorial, Children's Hospital of Orange County. And I've done a little bit of everything. I always joke with my students and I tell them I've done everything except escort interpreting. It's not what you think, okay? Escort interpreting is just following somebody around interpreting for them. So I've done everything except that. But other than that, I've done conference interpreting. And what makes me special? What gives me the authority to talk to you about exam preparation, and specifically regarding the court interpreter exam? Well, let me tell you what. When I graduated from my bachelor's in interpreting, I went to take the interpreter test. And lo and behold, I took it once and I didn't pass. I said, what's going on? I have a bachelor's in interpreting. I should be able to pass this test. So I go and I take it again and I fail it one more time. And then I take it a third time. Okay. And finally, the third one was the one that made me pass, and I was able to pass, but it took me 3 times. And I thought to myself, what's going on? What's the problem here? Is it I went to school for 4 years for this, and I should have been prepared, but I'm not passing in. Maybe it's just me. I'm a failed interpreter. Something's wrong with me. And I had in my head for many years. I got certified. I started working in medical court, whatever. And I thought to myself, what is the problem? Where am I failing? Is it that I'm not a good interpreter? Maybe I'm not up for this. And I started analyzing the exam, and I started reading a few books on the subject matter, and finally it just clicked. Something's going on. We're not focusing our attention on the things that we need to focus on. And that is why we are failing the court interpreter exam. So that's what we're going to. So Zainab, again, she invited me, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in about the next hour. Let's just say about 30 minutes, and I'll explain what this interpreter exam is all about. Now, I know that I'm talking to a group that's from the Arabic language. It doesn't matter. You can speak Tagalog, Arabic, Farsi, Vietnamese. It doesn't matter. I've trained Punjabi students, Mandarin students to pass the exam. It doesn't matter what language you are. The techniques, the concepts are the same. So today I am going to enlighten you. Okay, so remember, I failed many times miserably, and today I'm going to tell you what was my road, what was my trip, what was the road that I took to pass. And then after, when I started to become an educator, because I did teach in a few universities, court interpreting, what I decided. So let me tell you about that first before we get started. So I started teaching at university. Remember, I failed miserably at the beginning, and then I started teaching my students, and then they were failing miserably as well. I said, okay, now something's really going on. So I didn't pass on the first, second, third try, and they're not passing on the first, second, third try. What's going on with them? So then that's when I decided, I said, I have to research, I have to do something different. Otherwise, this is not going to work. So that's what I'm going to share with you today. Okay, so let's talk about the consortium exam. Now, not all of you are going to take the consortium exam. Let me explain why. What is the consortium exam? What is the state court interpreter exam? There's 50 states, okay? And not all states have their own certification exam. Let's go to the example of New York, okay? And even California. California used to have its own interpreter exam. It's its own state court interpreter exam. So does New York right now. California ran out of budget. They didn't have the budget, so they couldn't continue to have their own interpreter exam. So they said, you know, we don't have any more money. So there used to be some lone states around there, like, for example, Washington, Oregon. There used to be a few states, and they used to belong to this thing that they called the consortium exam. And basically, with the consortium exam, it was a bunch of states that they shared their resources, and they created. They would say, "Look, we have an exam. You have an exam. We have an exam. Let's just swap exams and exchange exams." Why do you do this? Well, let me explain. When you take an exam, or let's say California creates an exam, or any state creates an exam, people start taking it, and then they take it once, twice, three, four, five, and guess what? You have to create a new one, right? Because everybody's going to memorize the same exam. So what these states did is they would swap the exams. They said, here, you use ours, we'll use yours, and that's how they would work. And that was the consortium exam. So many states are part of this consortium exam. This is a key concept, okay? A key concept. Just hold it right there, right in the back of your head. The consortium exam, a set of exams. Okay, so that's, and then some states said, nah, we're not going to join, like New York, for example. They have their own exam. But it's still the same concept. Even though they have their own exam, they still hold a lot of key concepts. And I'll go to those key concepts in a minute. So let's start. So, okay, there's a consortium. So I didn't know any of this. See, when you go take the exam, you just go take it. I'm an interpreter. I have to go pass. I got to pass this exam. And that's not how it works. Okay, so I started reading on all these things, and that's what I'm going to explain to you now. So you don't have to go through all the things that I went, or for that matter, all the students that I had to go through. So let's explain what this exam is all about. So the consortium exam, which is what most of you are going to take. Now, again, if some of you are from, for example, a state that is not part of the consortium, this is still relevant for you. It's still relevant, even though you're not part of the consortium, okay? So let's talk about court interpreter exams, or even medical exams for that matter. It doesn't matter. They're composed of two things, a written component and an oral component, okay? What is the written component all about? Well, the written component is they want to make sure that you can speak the language. It's kind of like, let's say, a screening, okay? And so they want to make sure. Now, there's a little problem with the consortium exam. Because of budget issues, they only have a written exam for English. You're saying, well, aren't they supposed to grade English and Arabic? Yeah, but they only create one exam for everybody because of budget issues. So that's why many states, if you're part of the consortium, which many of you are, you will only take as your written component, you will only take an English exam. Now, again, I'm going to New York because that's kind of like one of the lone wolves around there, one of the big lone wolves. If you're part of New York, then you will have to take perhaps maybe an English and a Spanish, or I'm sorry, an Arabic component. I doubt it, but so it can change a little bit. I don't know what state each of you are in. You might have to take an English component and an Arabic component. But if you belong to a consortium state like California, like Texas, like Florida, etc., then you will only take an English component. Okay. Now, in comparison to the oral component, the written component is, let's just call it fairly easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's comparison to the oral, it's fairly easy. Okay. Now that's the written component. What do they rate you on the written component? They want to make sure that you can read, right? That's what they have, or they'll have a part where that deals with grammar. They'll have a part that deals with idiomatic expressions. Now you're saying, why idiomatic expressions? Why that? Well, because you see, idiomatic expressions are a true measure of a person's knowledge in the language. What are you talking about? What do you mean by this? Very easy. Let's say you take 1 semester of Arabic, and you can say hello, good morning, and maybe you can understand a lot of things. That's not enough. When you could say good morning, hello, you could say a bunch, you can learn a lot of things, but that just doesn't cut it. When you learn idiomatic expressions, for example, in English, let's just talk about English, that really measures your true knowledge of the language. That's why they're so keen on idiomatic expressions. So again, grammar, of course, idiomatic expressions. They want to know if you know about legal terminology. They want to know if you know about ethics. So those are the kinds of things that they'll measure. And I'm sure most of you, a lot of people here probably already passed the written. Okay, so that's what the written is all about. I'm not going to focus on that. My true focus on this conversation that we're having is the oral. Okay, so now we go to the oral component. So that's where we're going to focus. The oral component. So what's the oral all about? A lot of people say when I took it or when I had my students, it's very hard to pass this test. Why is it so hard to pass this test? It's hard to pass this test because people don't know what they're going to ask. Okay, and when people study for the oral examination, they study everything under the rainbow. Okay, I don't know each of you probably went to a school. I know that in Arabic it's really hard to find an actual school, a school for Arabic interpreters. There probably isn't that, and that's my experience in a lot of other languages like Punjabi. There's no school. There might be some courses here and there, so there's no school. So many of you probably had to study on your own, and I feel for you. So when you study on your own, let's say you use some type of documents like the Interpreter's Edge from Holly Mickelson. That's that's one of some of the few materials that are out there for Arabic interpreters. So you don't have a lot, but let's say whatever you have, it's a lot. It's a lot. There's a lot of materials out there. There's so many things you can study. So you don't have a roadmap. You don't know what you have to study. And that's the biggest problem. Now, is there a book out there that tells us what we have to study? There is. As a matter of fact, there is, because believe it or not, people in the Spanish speakers, which are the ones that have schools all over the place, and they can't pass it either. And they have dozens and thousands of, I don't know if thousands, but hundreds of schools out there that train, and they still can't pass. What's going on? So imagine that you have nothing. I mean, relatively nothing. Where do you receive education? Well, how do you do it? Well, there are books out there. There are materials out there that, believe it or not, tell you what you have to study. And I will share some of these books with Zainab at the end of this of our talk. The National Center for State Courts has one. California has one. It's a very good one, by the way, that tells you exactly what they ask. So what do they ask? Well, what they ask is what we encounter in courts. Okay, that's what they have. So let's go one component by component. We'll start covering what it is that they ask in the state exam. So before I do, are there any questions? Because I'm going to start going through each component. Any questions out there? Are we okay? Can you hear me, Zainab?
So you mentioned that New York has a different written exam. Does that mean they're not part of the consortium?
They're not part of the consortium, definitely.
If somebody is certified in New York, what does that mean?
That means that there's something that we call reciprocity. That means, for example, if you got certified in Texas, you can work in LA, and if you get certified in California, you can work in Texas. That's called reciprocity because we're member states of the consortium. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure, because I'm 100% sure between Texas and California, but I am not 100% sure between New York and Texas and LA, because there's no reciprocity agreements. So that's a problem with not being part of the consortium. But I mean, technically, if you pass the state exam in California, you shouldn't have any problem. Go take it in New York and you'll pass it. That's theoretically the case. But let me tell you this. I mean, to pass this exam, all the stars have to align. When I mean that is, you woke up that morning, you had your stomach was hurting, you're not going to pass the exam. It takes a lot of things. I've had people that a parent has died, a mother, father, I don't know, 2 or 3 days before, I'm not kidding. And I'm not joking about this. And that's another thing. You emotionally, physically, and mentally have to be up there. And you know, if you're going through a divorce, you might not pass. You know, if you have a terrible headache, you have diarrhea, you will not pass. And if you're too nervous, you will not pass. So it doesn't matter what I tell you today. Even if I gave you the test, you would not pass because you have to. Those three things have to align. I even teach people to meditate before the exam. It goes that far. So yeah, some states are not. There's no reciprocity. Any other question?
Yeah, I have a question. So do you know if Arizona is, can we get a reciprocity from Arizona to California?
And so then I would ask, there's two things that you have
Consortium.
to ask yourself for the reciprocity. Number one, is it a consortium state? That would be the first question. The second question is, how do they grade you? Let me explain that. Some states, the way they grade you is, for example, California, you have to pass all of the components, site, consecutive, and simultaneous. If you don't pass one, then you don't pass. Some states, if you don't pass one of the components, then they will let you just repeat that one component. Let's say you didn't pass simultaneous. Then they'll tell you, okay, you got to retake the exam, but only the simultaneous component. California will not accept you if the way that they grade you in that state is that way. They will only accept you if, for example, let's go back to California and Texas, which I am 100% sure have the reciprocity agreement. Texas, you have to pass the three components on one shot to get certified. The same thing with California. So those two for sure are compatible in reciprocity. But if your state, again, if you pass two, then they only make you take one, then there's no reciprocity there. See?
Mhm.
That's what my understanding has been, and not from just the literature, just people telling me, you know. So you got to be careful. You got to see what's going on. I don't know about Arizona, how they work, if they grade you all three at the same.
But I noticed that Arizona, the only difference is that they consider site one component when California considers site two components.
That could be a problem. But I
And
have
that's a problem.
that could be a problem. Remember, I told you those are the two things, how
Yeah.
they grade. So that for sure I know is
Is an issue there.
important, an issue. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other question before I get started? Because I'm a locomotive. I get started, then I don't know if I'm going to be able to stop.
Okay.
Okay. Let's get started. Let's go in order. Let's start with site translation. Okay. Let's start with site translation. So site translation, people say, okay, so what's going on with site translation? So I have to know, what do I have to know for site translation? Well, if you look at their documents, their literature, they usually say let's go first with English to Arabic. Okay, English to Arabic. And when I say English to Arabic, usually it says English to foreign language. What do we do the most in courts? That we can do a lot of site translation documents, but what we do the most in courts is our police reports. Okay, so for example, we have a defendant, and let's say, let's talk about an Arabic case. Let's say there was a domestic violence. Okay, because I'll be honest with you, in every culture has different types of crimes that are prevalent. I mean, that's just how it is, you know. But I'm going to throw out Arabic. We have a gentleman that came in for domestic violence, right? And they're going to tell him this is the police report, right? This is what happened. So you're going to read the police report, and many times the defendant said, no, that's not true. That's not what happened. Okay, it doesn't matter. But that's what we do mostly in court. And when we do site translations, we read police reports, and that could mean driving under the influence, domestic violence, a traffic stop. They got a ticket, right? They got a ticket, and that's what it is. Usually, when we interpret from English into Spanish, our stronger language has to be the target language, which in our case would be what? Arabic. So if your language pair, I mean, I don't know what each one of you knows what your situation is. Maybe some of you you learned Arabic living in the US, or some of you learned Arabic at, you lived in one of the countries that speaks Arabic, then you're native, right? So it depends who you are. Usually, if you're a native Arabic speaker, you're you will do good in this component. This component shouldn't be a problem because your native language is Arabic. If your language pair is, if you're not a native, you'll have difficulty a little bit in this component. Now, why do I say a little bit? Because who writes these reports? Police officers. I'm not saying anything about police officers, but they are meant to be very clear and just to state facts. Like, give me an example. I'm just going to read a tip off the top of my head. On October 3rd, 2017, I was patrolling the area in Springfield. I noticed a suspicious vehicle driving northbound on 13th Avenue. Blah 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 blah. See where we're going? That's a typical police report. So that's what you're going to be graded on. That's what you should be expecting. Now, some of you may say, well, wait, but in school, or I studied these documents in this book. If you read what I'm going to send you with Zanab, I'll give her it so she can email you. If you start reading these documents, you'll notice that that's typically, not always, but typically what they're going to grade you on. So that's what you should be expecting. See, now you're in a position where, that's great. So I know what I have to study now, right? That's what it's all about. So that's what English to Arabic. Now, when we go from Arabic to English, that's where it gets hairy, because then we have a wide array of documents. What type of documents are we talking about? Well, there's a lot of type of things. Now, that's what we read when we're in open court. Let's say, for example, let me just give you an example. Let's say somebody lives in, let's say there's a divorced couple, and the child lives with the mother in Egypt, and she is giving permission to the child to travel with the parent to the U.S. That's one type of document. There's could be many types. And that's, I give permission for my son, blah, 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 to travel with the father. And this is in Spanish or in any language. So the category in Arabic or in the site translation is which are called letters. Okay, no, correspondence. That's what it's called. Correspondence. That's the category. Correspondence. That means letters to the judge. Okay, letters to attorneys. Correspondence, and they could be of any type of correspondence. And usually, this correspondence needs to be notarized, and it needs to be official. So there can be many types of correspondence. It could be, for example, if somebody's getting a letter of recommendation, okay, an authorization for a child to travel, okay. It could be, and again, it's not an infinite list. It's not an infinite list, but it is a big list. Now, you notice that from English to Arabic, it was not a big list. It was just police reports. But in Spanish, from Arabic to English, it could be a wider list, but it's not an infinite list. Again, when those books that I send you, it will give you the possible scenarios. So I'm giving you two examples, and maybe Zanab can help me out there. She'll be able to give me another type of document, another type of letter that I can tell you from Spanish to English off the top of my head exactly what type of documents, because I train Spanish speakers. But for Arabic, it might be a little bit different because the culture is different. So there might be other documents that are more important than others. And that's where Zanab comes in. But that gives you a clear idea. So what's more difficult? Arabic to English. You have to, that means you have to
focus.
focus.
One, I think, was the police report. Second one was a letter to the judge for mercy.
Exactly. Very good. So if you notice there, correspondent, that falls into the category of correspondence. When she said letter to the judge, let me give you an example. Let's say They found an Arabic speaker guilty of domestic violence. So maybe the family members say, listen, Hanin is a very good man. He's been responsible with his family. This happened, but this was just an isolated incident. We believe that he is a good member of the society. I don't know. No, you can imagine. You can envision that. That's a typical. Now that's one of the easier ones. It could also be a very very legal document. Okay, maybe there's a police report from Egypt, let's say, and it could be very serious, and it can again it could be a little bit more complicated. So now now you're starting to get an idea. Okay, all right, so that's what site translation is all about. Okay, how about the others? Well, here we go with the others. Any question on the site translation up to there? Because I'm going to jump to consecutive after this. Any question?
Yeah, just do you mind telling them like how many minutes and how?
Oh, okay, yeah, but
strategy?
thank you, Zainab.
Thank you.
Zainab is a police officer. Good. Okay, so site translation. So okay, I've told you now the type of document. Now, what's the mechanics behind that exam? So, okay, you're gonna go inside a little room, okay, and you're gonna go in front of this person. They call this person a proctor. How do you translate proctor? Well, a proctor is basically it's a test administrator. That's what it is. It's the person that administrates the test. So if you think about proctor, translate test administrator. That's technique. It's called parallel translation. If you can't find a word to translate proctor, define the word. For example, what's the definition of proctor? Test administrator. And then translate test administrator. It's a technique. It's called parallel translation. Okay, so the proctor is going to be in front of you. Now, mind you, don't get nervous if you see the proctor, because the proctor doesn't know anything. Okay? Sometimes people say, they always come to me, oh, you know what? The proctor told me that I did a great job. And I tell them, well, that's good. I mean, at least they give you some pep talk, but they really don't know anything. And if you see the proctor frowning upon your interpretation, don't even worry about it. That's just a person they pay to make sure that you don't cheat. That person is not bilingual usually, and doesn't know about interpretation. Even if they are bilingual, they don't know anything about interpretation. Just relax. Just think of that person as no importance in the sense of your rendition. Don't feel embarrassed if you did bad in front of this person. Don't worry. So you're in with the proctor. There's some tape recorders there. Now, I don't know. I don't think they're going to do a computer-based exam yet, because they had a big fiasco with the company that's in charge of the state, at least here in California. But I don't think they're going to do computerized. But usually they have digital recorders. At the end, if we have time, I'm going to tell you a few things about some fiascos with the technology. But right now, that's not the focus. So this person doesn't know anything about interpreting, so don't worry. So what's going to happen? They're going to give you a document. Usually the document is about 250 words. What does that mean? Okay, if you've ever seen a Word document, 500 words is an entire page, a full page. That is at double space and 12 font and all that. That's about 500 words. So the exam is about 250 words. That means about half a page. Okay, that's fine. So it's going to be half a page. They're going to give you 2 minutes, and this is very important. They're going to give you 2 minutes to review the document, and then they're going to give you 3 minutes to render the document. What do I mean 2 minutes by reviewing? That means you're going to get to read the document, see what it's all about. Now, if Zainab allows me, I'll give you some technique right now. Do not repeat. Do not interpret the document while you're reading. What am I saying? Okay, so you get a document, right? Let me see if you get a document, and then what do a lot of people do? They start to interpret, site translating in their mind the document. You don't want to do that. Why? Because you're going to run out of time. You're going to go through halfway through the document, and then they're going to say, okay, start interpreting. I didn't read the whole document. And sure, guess what? The part that you managed to interpret in your mind, you'll probably do pretty well on it. But the part that you didn't get to interpret in your mind, you will not do well on it. So don't do that. What you and again, we'll cover this if you ever take some training. We'll tell you what to do in those 2 minutes. Those 2 minutes are key. That is where you pass the exam, and at least that component. Believe it or not, it's those 2 minutes. It's like I always tell people, it's like a marathon, right? You don't win the day of the marathon is just a payoff. Okay, the day you do the exam is just a payoff. All the work, those 6 months that you were running every day and lifting weights, that was the work. That the day of the marathon is just the day of the marathon. It was those 6 months that really mattered, and that's the same thing with that day. So it's the same thing with those 2 minutes. It's those 2 minutes that are going to make you or break you, not when you start reading. Because when in those 2 minutes are where you're going to find where the difficult terminology is. You're going to learn what you're going to know what all that text is all about. Okay, this is about a guy that that hit his wife, and then there was a domestic violence issue, and then there were some witnesses. Okay, I know what this text is about. And then there's about 5 words here that I don't know. Okay. And there's some linguistic problems with this phrase and this phrase. Okay, all of this you're doing those 2 minutes. Now, when they say, okay, start to read, then it's just reading. It's all that work that you've done in those 2 minutes. That we'll see if we ever take a class together. Those 2 minutes are key. This they don't teach you anywhere. And this is what I learned the hard way. Okay, so those 2 minutes are key, and then you start reading, and of course you pass your exam, right? So that's it. That's the site translation component. You get 2 minutes to render. Some people even don't use those 2 minutes. It baffles me. How come you're not using the 2 minutes? No, I read it. I'm ready. No. By the way, if you take 1 minute, you're not going to get 4 minutes to render. If you only take 1 minute, they're still going to give you the 3 minutes. If you take 30 seconds, they're still going to only give you 3 minutes. So they're not going to give you more time to read because you take less. So take the entire 2 minutes, okay? Especially now that I told you that they're key. As a matter of fact, if it were possible, which is not, I would take 4 minutes to review the document. I'm sorry, 3 minutes to review the document and 2 minutes to render. If it were possible, it's not, but if it were possible, I would spend more time reviewing than to reading. That's how important that reviewing time is. Okay, so that's that. Okay, and there's a lot of technique, and I can go for hours talking about technique in that site time. But you see, now you're saying, yeah, well, okay, that's a great piece of advice, right? And that's a great piece of advice, and that's a great piece of advice. But if you start adding all these little pieces of advice, guess what? It's huge. That's how it goes. Okay, let's talk about are there any questions there before I pass to consecutive? Thank you, Zanal, for asking.
Thank you.
You would have missed all that explanation if you would have not asked that. You
That's the most
imagine that?
important part.
Okay, so let's talk about consecutive. I love consecutive. You know why I like consecutive so much, Zanab?
Yes.
Because believe it or not, it's one of the hardest components, and actually it's one of the easiest.
True.
This exam, it's all about your mind, right? How you see things. Do you see the glass half full or half empty, right? Like everything else in life. Okay, so consecutive, it's timed. What do I mean by timed? You can't take forever to do it, right? You can't take forever. And it is timed, but it's not like the federal exam. If any of you are taking the federal, time for the consecutive is very limited in the consecutive. As a matter of fact, in the federal, if you take your 2 repetitions, you'll probably run out of time to pass the exam. Now, none of you will take the federal because it's only offered in Spanish. I'm just comparing it. So in state exams, they give you, I would say, enough time. Okay, so all of you have done consecutive, right? You hear a message like, for example, so Mr. Hanin, I'm sorry I'm using you, Hanin, for everything. I hope you don't mind. So, so Hanin, on October 31st, 2019, what were you doing in that party, right? That's a typical question or that they would ask a witness in a consecutive. See, the consecutives are always a witness examination, and it could be usually it's a cross examination. Could be a cross examination of a witness or a defendant. Likely not a defendant. Let me tell you why not a defendant. It's never wise to have a defendant give his testimony, because if they give their testimony, they'll make mistakes. You know, the prosecution will tear them apart. So that's why you don't want. I mean, as a defense counsel, you don't want to put the end once I'm done doing everything that I have to do, because remember those 2 minutes are valuable. But if, for example, I read the document, and what you have when you read the document, you have to know what happened, who was involved, when did this happen. You know, answering like the who, where, when, why, all these things, right? So when you look at a document, you have to know exactly what's going on, and that shouldn't take you more than a minute. In other words, you skim through the document. Okay, great. Now you're saying I can't avoid not-interpreting. That's okay. Interpret. You can interpret. Once you're done with reviewing the document, let's say you got to find the words that you don't know. Let me tell you why. Remember I talked to you about scoring units, which are key terms that they're looking for. I actually did an experiment with my students yesterday. I gave a class and I had them underline the words, and then I flipped the page, and then what we notice is the words that they didn't know, and then the next page I had the scoring units, and then what happened when we went to the next page, the highlighted terms transferred to the next page, and most of the words that they didn't know were the scoring units, which means is if you don't know a word, that's precisely the word that they want you to know. In other words, the only word that you don't know is the only word they care about. And people say, well, that doesn't help me much, right? The only words that they're going to grade me on is precisely the words that I don't know. So figure that out, right? Well, no, that's an advantage in our favor. If we don't know, if we know that the only words that they care about are the words that we don't know, then we have to figure them out some way. There's technique for that, by the way. There's a lot of techniques for that. Of course, there's the context, right? There's a lot of things that we can use to figure out words, but there's other techniques. Those are not the only techniques. But anyways, back to that. So you're saying, okay, I cannot do without translating the text. That's fine, but you have to do. It's a process. First, you read. Then you figure out what's going on. Now, let's say there's 3 words you don't know. You have to know what you're going to do for those 3 words, because leaving them in the same language is not an option. It's 0. If you leave a word in the same language, it's 0. If you guess the word, you have at least a percentage of a possibility. Could be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever. But if you leave it in English, then there's no possibility. Or if you leave it in the original language, there's no possibility. That's 0. Now, sometimes they tell you when you go to school or when you read books, if you don't know a term, don't guess the term. You leave it in the same language. That's in real life. This is an exam. The rules are off the table here. If you guess, you guess. Nobody's going to jail, or nobody's going to get the wrong. If you say left and it was a right foot, nobody's going to get a foot cut off. This is a test. So guessing is not off the table. I prefer guessing than leaving it in the same language. So there's techniques. But anyways, if you have to interpret, if you think that you need to interpret, do it. But do it at the end. I usually take about 30, 40 seconds and I start interpreting. And then when they say, okay, time's up, okay, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's your last thing. All right, great question. Thank you, Abraham. All right, let's finish up with simultaneous now. Now, simultaneous, the good thing about simultaneous, it's always, according to the literature, and when you say what literature, well, two books that I'm going to facilitate to Zainab, according to the literature, they say that simultaneous will always be opening or closing arguments. Why is that? That's huge. Why? Because now we know what they ask. Now we know what we're up against. What is opening and closing arguments? An example. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we are going to talk about Amin. Amin committed a despicable crime, the crime of theft, whatever. Okay, and then they start. It's a story. It's going to be an attorney speaking to the jurors, okay, and talking about the crime. Now, there's some really cool things about the simultaneous. So, since we know it's always going to be a closing or opening argument, we know that there's key terms that are going to appear. For example, what do I mean by key terms? We have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that blah blah this. We want you to go back to the jury delivery room, okay, and find a guilty verdict for the crimes. And then there's all this vocabulary that's involved in opening and closing. And so it's predictable. Did you know that? Did you know that? Remember I told you the scoring units? In every component, they score a certain amount of scoring units. For example, in sight, in sight, there's 3 words that they'll grade you on when it deals with legal terminology. Only 3 words. And everybody says, "What do you mean in 3 words?" Yeah, 3 words. So you mean to tell me that I was worried? I saw this legal document. It had like 100 really difficult terms. Only 3 of those difficult terms were graded. Yeah. You didn't know that? No. I was so scared. I did terrible because I thought, well, that's how it is. It's only 3 legal terms. You don't believe me? It's in the book. What book? The exam creation book. How they developed the exam. It's there. It's in their literature. It's only 3 words. Oh, so even if I didn't know any legal terminology, there was only going to grade 3 words? Yep. Oh, okay. How about in simultaneous? Wow, simultaneous is very interesting because simultaneous is where they will grade you in the most amount of legal terminology. That means the greatest amount of legal terminology will be in the simultaneous component. But that's actually great because in simultaneous, it's so predictable to know what the legal terminology is. Ladies and gentlemen, I just told you 3. During cross-examination, we found that this man was lying. There's about 20 terms I could just tell you right off the top of my head, okay, like guilty verdict, cross-examination, opening statement, closing argument, beyond a reasonable doubt, beyond with a preponderance of the evidence. See how I can even tell you all those words. At least 5 or 6 of those will appear on every single simultaneous component. Every single one, whether it be closing, whether it be opening. So it's the most predictable when it deals with legal terminology. So it's not like it's the most predictable in the sense of what they're going to say, because that is exactly why they choose opening and closing argument. Why do you think they don't ask you jury instructions? We do jury instructions all the time. That should be together with opening and closing. Jury instructions should be number 1. The reason they don't grade us on jury instructions is because it's predictable. It's too predictable. We can actually memorize jury instructions. I'm not kidding. You can memorize them because jury instructions they're so similar. Depending on the crime, they'll give you different instructions, but only certain things change. Other than that, jury instructions, most of the components are almost the same. That's why they don't grade us on jury instructions, because they want us to do something that's very unpredictable, right? Something that'll catch us up. That's closing arguments are always different. Yes, that's true. They're always different. However, the terminology is not always different. See, they use a lot of terminologies that's always the same. And for and in our benefit, it's always legal terminology that's always the same. The case can change, but not the legal terminology. And luckily, that's what they grade us on most, legal terminology. Not on the sites. You think that the sites, no, it's simultaneous. And unfortunately, I have the slides to show you because I have all the data to back all these things that I'm saying. I'm just not, taking this out of where. No. This is all these are from statistics, from books, from exam preparation manuals, all this. So so simultaneous. Yes, it's difficult, but it's predictable. We know the terminology they're going to ask. Most of it is legal. I mean, there's all kinds of legal terminology, all kinds of terminology that are on the simultaneous. But what they're going to grade you on the most is legal, and we already know what kind of legal. I actually have glossaries to tell you exactly what words they're going to ask you. So, and the other thing is the speed. People say, oh no, it's super fast. No, it isn't. It's at 120 words per minute. As a matter of fact, the federal is at 120 words per minute. What is 100 words per minute? That is called conversational speed. For example, what is conversational speed? I'll give you an example of conversational speed. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we are here to try Mr. Robert Jimenez. Mr. Robert Jimenez committed a despicable crime, the crime of rape. We will prove beyond reasonable doubt that he, blah, 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 whatever. So that is 100 words per minute, 120 words per minute. All right? Okay, perfect. So now, I just gave you a very a quickie what is this exam all about. I could talk for hours about this exam. There's so many things that are in this, and as a matter of fact, Zainab and I are planning a training, and we'll talk about that when you stop the recording, that deals with simultaneous. People say, why do you guys start with simultaneous? Because it's so easy. It's easy. If you think, once you know what you're up against, right, is once you know your enemy, it's easy. But when you don't know, it's easy. That's why you fail 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. But once you know what you're up against, it's not difficult. So just remember that. Okay, it's study smart. All right. I'm never one to tell people, because a lot of people even blame me. Oh, you teach people all the shortcuts. You got to let them go. Yeah, I'm sure all of you have already been through a lot of hills, ups and downs, and you've had to study so much. Yeah, now it's your time now to give you the little shortcuts. And I think I've covered most of them, but the hour is up. Okay, Zainab or anybody, any questions up to there? I hope I haven't bored
Thank you, Edgar. Thank you for everything and for your time.
Have I
And
bored you yet?
no, we loved it. We loved it. So a lot of nice information. Everything you said, it's true. I was there. And for Arabic speakers, like many other languages, hard because we don't have those nice materials and we don't have instructors like you to help us. So, and if you like to announce about your consecutive that you're giving soon, I saw that on your website you have a nice discount.
Yes, I have a 40% discount for if you use a coupon code coupon40 capital COUPON 40. You get a 40% coupon on the consecutive training that we are having this Saturday, tomorrow, from 10 to 1 Pacific time. That is, that is intended already for professional interpreters that are already working, and they're certified court interpreters. It's a little bit, not too much. I mean, I always, believe it or not, no matter how much you start with the basics always, right? And because we forget the basics, and I cover everything. So I would say intermediate, advanced. If anybody's in that level, they can attend. Thank you. And yeah, it's in my website. It's called Advanced Consecutive Techniques.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else have a question before we end the recording?
Just you mentioned the scoring units, and each part has scoring units. Just to mention that the scoring units in themselves they're looking in other things in the scoring units.
A lot of things.
Which,
Grammar.
which makes it complicated. If they want to hear the past, for example, in a grammar, past tense, they.
Okay, so let me tell you how the scoring. I always tell people, if you try to speak the best English or Arabic that you can, you don't have to worry about scoring units because you can't. Okay. If you have let's say simultaneous, you have 3 pages. Usually, they're reading off a script that has 3 pages. In those 3 pages, let's say they have 8 scoring units that deal with grammar. If you mind your grammar throughout the 3 pages, you shouldn't even think of grammar because that's something that you should be doing anyways, right? You should be speaking correctly. But so there's certain things that you really can't pinpoint. It's hard for you to know. But there's certain things that you do know. Like for example, if somebody says the knife perforated his kidney and his liver. Okay. So I mean, you heard the word. The knife perforated his kidney and his liver. So you know now that kidney and liver, those 2 words are definitely scoring units. Okay, why? Because they're medical terms. Those 2 terms. Now, now they were speaking in the past. The knife perforated his kidney and liver. Past tense, right? It could have been a scoring unit, but you don't know because grammar is all throughout the text. So that we're not going to worry too much. For example, my 2 students, I say just speak as best as you can, but that's not going to be what you're going to be looking at because it's so difficult to pinpoint. Because they can underline literally any phrase in those 3 pages, but there's other things that we know, like a bad word. If you hear a bad word, 100% that bad word is a scoring unit. 100%. But grammar, we don't know. This sentence maybe, this sentence maybe not. So bad words, grammar, idiomatic expressions, articles of clothing. I like I said, there's idiomatic expressions like he ran out of there like a bat out of hell. Right? Like a bat. That is an idiomatic expression. That is 100% a scoring unit. A proverb, scoring unit. So there's things that we can anticipate. There's things that we can't. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm gonna end the recording now. Thank you very much, Edgar. We can stay a little bit longer.
Yeah, we'll stay longer to answer any question that you may have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Having you here.